Hello and welcome to the Gallimorphry, a hodgepodge history podcast. My name's Will and I'm joined today, as usual, with my co-host Nick. Would you say you're more fine or more dandy today?
I mean, I'm always fine.
Obviously, that's not being put into question here.
I feel like Desperate Dan. That's how dandy I feel.
Desperate Dan, you look like Desperate Dan. Have you been working out again?
Yes, I've been eating a lot of pies.
A lot of pies.
And this is a very retro reference for people.
When they ask who ate all the pies, it's probably you then.
I don't know if it's a product of like bad self-control or of my ADHD tendencies, but when I get given like packets of things, I just eat them.
So if I gave you a sack of donuts...
Do you remember that scene in The Simpsons where Homer's in hell, he's being tortured by being fed donuts?
Yeah, it would be like that, would it?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Oh, that'd be nice.
On that note, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm recovering from a cold, which is why I sound so husky and appealing right now.
Yes, you do sound quite manly.
Yeah.
It's always nice when you get a bit of phlegm and just like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Lovely bit of husky phlegm.
See, I reckon if we were born about 30, 40 years earlier, we'd sound even huskier because we'd probably have a few decades of smoking under our belt.
But anyway, today is your lucky day, Nick.
Are you finally going to pop the question?
No.
Oh.
Today is the day when we talk about one of your most kind of cherished passions in life, and that is dancing. Yes, so today, Nick, you can dance if you want to. You can leave your cares behind. You are the dancing queen, young and something, only 17.
Oh, God, if only I was 17 again. With all the knowledge I've collected, I'd probably still end up where I am anyway.
Of all those things, it's the bit about being 17 that you question, not the dancing queen part.
I mean, we're all dancing queens, really. Like, I can strut my stuff with the best of them, just as long as no one's looking and it's in a dark room.
Yeah, that's a very special kind of dancing. Are you normally in a little cage as well with sort of tassels?
And leather chaps, yes.
Yeah.
Of all the songs you could have picked, you have not picked the most apt song, which is the 2009 banger by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, which is Heads Will Roll. And as the dulcet tones of Karen O once said, dance, dance, dance till you're dead. Dance till you're dead. Because today we're going to be talking about the Dance of Death, the great dancing plague of 1518, which struck the city of Strasbourg. It's perhaps a combination of perplexing, humorous, and horrifying all at once.
Yes, so anybody who was thinking that we might be doing an episode on late 2000s indie music, sadly disappointed. But for anyone else, it should be quite an interesting episode.
Indeed. So, the dancing plague of Strasbourg, as we said, struck in July 1518 and was essentially a bunch of people who were struck with the uncontrollable urge to dance for days until they collapsed unconscious or even died. And this wasn't just a case of the rhythm taking over, because there are a number of theories have been, posturized about this outbreak, which range from the scientific, bouts of epilepsy, frontal lobe damage, conversion disorder, to, poison crops that cause convulsions, and of course, good old superstition, be it the devil's work or, pesky witches and their curses. It's always the witches, isn't it, that get the bad rep?
It is, yes. So one of the earliest known instances of disco fever. Doctors scratched their heads, theologians pondered divine punishment, and confused townspeople watched in fascination and fear.
Yes, so on the 14th of July, the hysteria kicked off when a woman known as Frau Trothea stepped into the street and began to twist, twirl and shake. But she couldn't stop. Indeed, she would not stop for days, only pausing until she collapsed from exhaustion and eventually was carted off up a mountain to a holy shrine to cure her illness. However, within 30 days of her beginning her gyrations, up to 30 more people were at it. And by late August, hundreds were dancing. It was the height of summer, it was hot, and inevitably that led to death. Exactly how many we don't know. I mean, one chronicle puts it at around 15 per day at its height. But the maths doesn't necessarily add up all the way through, because otherwise you'd be talking, quite a lot, thousands literally. This wasn't actually the first case of an outbreak of mass dancing. And, funny enough, also not the first case of an outbreak of mass dancing in this particular region of around the River Rhine and around this upper valley. Because obviously you know where Strasbourg is. It's now in France. But throughout history, it's kind of changed hands between the Germans and the French quite a few times. So actually, one of the previous cases of where dozens of medieval towns along the Rhine, actually, not just one town, saw loads and loads of people seized by a compulsion to dance was in 1374. But also, this phenomena isn't confined just to this region. Like, there have been cases in Wales, Scotland, other parts of Europe as well, France.
Yeah, it wasn't spread by virus or bacteria in the way that the plague was. But it did, at least to the people at the time, appear to spread by some kind of factor. Mentioning sort of historic ones, I did read an interesting theory that the tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin might have been inspired by a dancing craze from the 13th century, where children were known to have danced and jumped for up to 20 kilometres.
In my head, when you said jumped up to 20 kilometres, I thought you meant straight up. And I thought, blimey, it's like Superman levels of jump. But no, I didn't read about that, but I did read about there were specific dancing cults across Europe. There were people who would try to induce a state of like dancing trance where they would just sort of lose themselves. But what actually did cause this dancing plague? We'll come to that. But first we're going to run through exactly what happened, the events, as far as we know them. And it was one of those events which was so unusual that it was chronicled really well, both at the time and then thereafter. There were loads of scholars that came about to sort of study what went on here, including one fella, a particularly vile, dislikable misogynist called Paracelsus, who arrived in the city of Strasbourg in 1526, so a couple of years after the actual outbreaks began and subsided. He was quick to point out that he felt that Frau Trophea, who was the first woman afflicted by this illness, started doing it purely out of spite for her husband, and then surmised that she quickly became possessed, in part due to woman's lustful nature. Yes,
this was, of course, the 16th century Europe, so misogyny was all over the place, and Paracelsus was no exception.
I suppose modern day Europe, where misogyny is still over the place, but it's kind of hidden.
Yeah, I feel like misogyny is more subtle these days. No more acceptable, but
yeah, that's what we need to do here. We won't talk too much about this fella, but he does provide us historical context of the events. But coming back to Frau Trophea, and particularly to the city she lived in, Strasbourg.
So Strasbourg, in the early 16th century, was a city steeped in both history and tradition. So it was founded by the Romans in the 1st century AD, when it was called Argentoratum, and it served as a vital military outpost on the western front of the Roman Empire. Following the decline of the Roman Empire, however, the city fell under the control of the Merovingian Franks, and this was around the 5th century. The Merovingians were a Germanic dynasty and ruled much of what we now call France for several centuries. And they in turn left their mark on Strasbourg's culture and also their language. By the 13th century, Strasbourg had blossomed into a prosperous, free imperial city within what was then the Holy Roman Empire. It's a confusing name in that it was neither Holy, Roman, nor was it an empire. They essentially saw themselves as the legitimate continuation of the Roman Empire, even though they were mainly in Germany. But yeah, this political status granted the city a degree of autonomy, allowing it to govern itself and establish its own laws. Also, due to its situation at the crossroads between major European waterways like the Rhine, Strasbourg was able to thrive as a centre of trade in the region. However, life for your average Strasbourg citizen in the 16th century was far from idyllic. The rigid social hierarchy of the Holy Roman Empire placed peasants firmly at the bottom rung, and they were quite heavily burdened by taxes and were frequently forced to labour for the nobility.
That sounds just like everywhere else.
It was, but I think it plays into the character of Strasbourg. The threat of war and disease were ever present, casting a shadow of anxiety over everyday life. This is not to mention that famines were also relatively common, depending on basically how the weather had been that year. And also religion was a major part of daily life in Strasbourg. Though they were nominally Catholic, the city was and would become a hotbed of Reformation ideas in the early 16th century. So you might say that 16th century Strasbourg was a city of contrasts. While it boasted a rich history and enjoyed a degree of political autonomy, the lives of its citizens were marked by poverty, social inequality, and the constant threat of violence and illness. But the question is, to what extent did these factors play into the dancing plague that would come to the city in 1518?
Indeed, that is an important question. And as you mentioned, Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 just wasn't in a good way. Mm. It was a city of around 20,000 people, and over 2,000 of those people were in the receipt of poor alms. So, they were getting charity from the various institutions. Hundreds filled the hospitals and the poorhouses because, as you said, there were poor harvests, freezing winters and, boiling summers. It kind of feels a bit like today. And, of course, disease. Disease was everywhere. Smallpox, plague, and syphilis had sort of sprung up and was sort of prowling the land because... As much as we like to think of the medieval time as a more pious place, it really wasn't. Everyone was, engaged in lots of sinful escapades, and prostitution was sort of woven into the fabric of daily life, including within the clergy itself, which was supposed to obviously be sex-free, but they've never really been able to help themselves. Keep out of trouble, rather.
There is a sort of interesting hypocrisy to it. As we mentioned, on the surface, it was a very religious society. And yet they weren't very good at being religious at all, even though, it was such a major part of everyday life for your typical citizen.
No, exactly. I mean, the nobles and the clergy were actually sort of orchestrating events for their advantage most of the time. So they would hoard grain to drive up the price, which led to the suffering and starvation of the peasants beneath them. Keep concubines in their chapels. They would do all these things that were deemed inherently ungodly. So, for the average peasant, like let's say you and me, we'd probably be peasants back then.
Yeah.
Despite our impressive RP accents.
We would be very pretentious peasants.
We would have been very pretentious peasants. But even though our pretentiousness aside, bread would still be out of reach for us. We would have been laden with debt, because what happens is when crops don't grow, peasants have to go and then borrow money to buy food, which increases their debt, which increases their indenture. It's not a great cycle. Peasants had it bad, but the absolute people who had it the worst were women, as they have throughout history. They have always suffered the most. They were, as mentioned, misogyny was a part of daily life. They were deemed inferior to men because of the whole Adam and Eve thing. And they suffered the abuse of their husbands. They always ate the least at the table. In favour of men and children. And of course they were also just prone to the violence and terrible rapist whims of highborn nobles who basically got a free pass for doing it to the lowborn because it didn't count, apparently. It's actually depressingly sad that one of the few freedoms they had was that when they died, they got to request a separate burial from their husband, which wasn't always honoured.
So all they could look forward to was maybe a slight snub to the man who has potentially abused them for decades.
Indeed. But through all of this, perhaps the peasants themselves were the most superstitious of all the different ranks. They were the true believers in God and heaven and hell and sin. There are many theories put forward as to why Frau Trophea began to dance, and then other people decided to get up and dance and join her. And one of the major theories put forward by a fella called John Waller, who's done a lot of work on this. This dance was an emotionally induced trance response to the trauma of the past few years, the trauma of being a peasant at the time. No hope, no food, no future. So when you have a peasant and you're being told that you're going to be punished for being sinful, and the person telling you that you're going to be punished for being sinful has their dick in a prostitute while they're telling you, you're going to have a traumatic response to that. Because there's sin everywhere. So there was this idea that people put themselves into a trance to sort of appease God in a way, and in particular, one saint in particular, actually. Because back then, Catholicism, and it still does, has thousands and thousands of saints. Like there's a saint for everything. And there's one particular saint that's and his story is sort of unique to the region of the Rhine, which is also a possible explanation of why this dancing plague erupted as well. And that saint is Saint Vitus.
And he's the one who is often associated with this dancing plague. In this case, the association with Saint Vitus comes from his sort of wider association with nervous disorders and involuntary movements and spasms and that sort of thing. The story is that this is derived from the way that he died. So Saint Vitus was a young Christian man in the 4th century Roman Empire, and essentially he was put to death for his beliefs in the way that martyrs usually are. And the accounts at the time mentioned that this was done by boiling him alive in a cauldron of oil, and this caused his body to contort in a manner which was compared to dancing or in sort of involuntary movements or having a fit. And that is allegedly where this connection comes from. And then from there, it was associated with this dancing plague of 1518.
It's actually interesting to point out that, like many saints, Saint Vitus' story is entirely apocryphal in that it didn't really happen. Just because it's interesting on that point, he was, as you said, placed in a boiling vat of oil, but also there was a bit of tar thrown in as well. And apparently,
for good measure.
Yeah, for good measure, and came out unscathed.
Yeah.
So then he was tortured specifically by Roman emperors. Then they put him in a pit with a lion.
Yeah.
But he made friends with the lion.
Okay, it was a nice lion then.
It was a nice. Well, they didn't kill him apparently.
Yeah.
And then he was then placed in a room full of very attractive ladies to seduce him, but he resisted them all.
I can't imagine he was in the mood for much after being boiled and then being thrown in with a lion. I'm sure the ladies were like a welcome change for him, but
it's just nice to have someone to talk to, I suppose.
Yeah. But it's a funny thing with saints, isn't it? That they always have to have these sort of mythical, extravagant stories about them. It couldn't just be that he was such an ardent Christian that even when faced with death, he never gave up his beliefs, and then he died for that.
If you're going to the cinema and you were watching the story about just a good Christian who got up every day, went about their life, or one that was boiled in tar, came out unscathed, and then set up, I know which one I'd watch.
I mean, you know how it's going to end, though, don't you?
With a nice, quiet life.
Well, yeah, he'll go to heaven, won't he? And God will be kind of like, good work.
Oh, spoilers.
But there's loads of these saints. I remember I went to a CFE school, and obviously that was Church of England, where the saints are not as important as they are in Catholicism, but we only learned about 6 of them or something. I didn't realise there were so many.
There are thousands, my friend. But returning to Saint Vitus himself, so he had a growing following by the 10th century. As you mentioned, was considered one of the saints you sort of prayed to when you were afflicted by a sort of involuntary movement, particularly if you had epilepsy.
Yeah.
In fact, and pregnant women prayed to him as well.
Maybe it's a good measure, maybe you pick out a few and you pray to all of them and you think, well, all my bases are covered now.
Yeah, in many ways, the saints sort of satisfied that need for many gods, like older religions had, without them technically being gods. It's kind of an interesting get-out clause by the Catholics there, but we won't delve into the theological debate about that. Yeah, and his shrine sat in a cave in the mountains of Saverne, which is slightly inconvenient to get to. Dancing plagues themselves were actually originally connected with the devil. Indeed, the 1374 plague was seen to be devilish because a lot of people that were stood dancing apparently ripped off all their clothes and invited people to fornicate with them.
Right.
The distinction with the 1518 dance, we're actually going to go more into the detail of what happened after Frau Trofea kicked it off in a minute. Yeah. Was that it was done out of despair rather than sin and lust and happiness. It had a sort of more pious feel to it in a way. And then it sort of switched to being associated with St. John the Baptist. And then it switched to St. Vitus for some unknown reason. But as you mentioned, it's possibly connected to how he died. But also, there was a case of people dancing in Switzerland where it occurred around his saintly day, St. Vitus' Day.
Oh, this is at the water church, isn't it?
By the way, every saint has a day, and they often fall. Multiple saints fall on the same day as well. But after the 12th century, cases of dancing were mainly confined to the Rhine area, sort of cementing this link between a belief in Saint Vitus being the cause of any sort of dancing plague, who he would inflict upon people when he was angry with them for not respecting him or not being godly enough.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the concept of a vengeful saint until we covered this. You sort of see the saints as being like, I don't know, like God's foot soldiers or something, but they seem to have sort of personalities, and they seem to have opinions and things that they like and things that they don't like. And if they don't like it, then they come for you. You made that comparison to having multiple gods, like the pagan ways, or what the Romans or the Greeks would have believed in. And I suppose, again, it's very similar to that.
I'm just looking at a map of some of the outbreaks. There are so many along the Rhine. That stretches from like modern-day Belgium all the way down to sort of Switzerland itself. So you've got Zurich, Augsburg, Cologne, Erfurt, Aachen, Metz, Strasbourg itself, Basel, Liège, Maastricht, Ghent. So it's like specific to this area. So there is a sort of interesting connection there.
Yeah, so it goes all the way up to Belgium then, sort of, what's that, the North Sea?
It follows the course of the Rhine, really.
Ah.
So really it should be called the Rhine Dance, but...
Rhine Dance.
Yeah. Taking us back to the events of the 1580 plague itself. So obviously Frau Trophier kicks it off around the 14th, 15th of July. Then we move on to the 21st. You had quite a number of people, nearly over 100 people dancing, leading the city council to actually stand up and take note. So the city council was led by a group known as the 21, although it was written in Roman numerals, so it sounded more impressive. But very much like, what is it, the G8, there aren't actually 8 of them. It actually comprised of around 33 people, mostly made up of guild burghers and nobles.
Do you think that's because nobody knew, like nobody... I mean, Roman numbers are quite hard once you get past about 20. Maybe they were like, what? How do you do 33 in Roman numerals?
Yeah, maybe they were just lazy. Or maybe they just wanted the illusion that there was actually less people in control than...
I think it's because X is a cool letter, and they wanted to have an X in there. Yeah, but they didn't want XXX because that set completely the wrong impression. They didn't want to be the sexy committee.
No, especially with what they were doing in After Hours. We know they talked about the plague thanks to fantastic chronicles by Sebastian Brandt. They met numerous times to try and deal with this as an issue. They were quite horrified by it. And so, even though Frau Trophier herself had been sort of carried off to St. Vitus' shrine because they assumed it was some sort of religious mania, when loads of people started dancing at once, they actually, instead of seeking out spiritual help, they sought out the help of trained medical professionals, which I suppose is actually quite a reasonable response. It's like, this feels a bit weird, let's go and talk to a doctor.
Yeah, it feels very promising and very forward-thinking, and then you get to what the doctors actually have to say. So at this time, one of the main theories when it came to human health was this idea of the 4 humours. So they essentially, what they say is you have 4 very important liquids in your body. It is blood, yellow bile, black bile, and the other one. It's not piss.
Phlegm?
It's phlegm, isn't it?
It's phlegm.
Yeah. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile.
The other one, it's not piss.
Yeah. So they have this, that you have these 4 humours or 4 liquids in your body, and all of these things should be perfectly in balance. And if they are perfectly in balance, you'll have a healthy human. No problems at all. But if one becomes imbalanced, if you have too much or too little of another, it throws off the system, and then you have a variety of maladies. So if you're ill, if you have psychiatric problems, if you're unhappy, if you're suffering from depression, all of these things were described about an imbalance of the 4 humours. So they took a very literal approach to this and decided that the best way of balancing your humours was to remove the one that you have too much of. So they felt you had too much bile, they would remove bile. If you had too much blood, they'd remove blood. If they felt your blood was too hot, they'd try and cool it down. It kind of goes back to Greek times. Anyway, so they have this idea that the reason these people are uncontrollably dancing is because they have hot blood. You'd have thought hot blood, you'd get some ice or something, or maybe lead them up the Alps or something. But no, they decide that the best way they do it is just burn it off. So they say, we're going to just keep them dancing, dance until it burns off and the blood is no longer hot. And basically, it's a bit like when a toddler has a tantrum and you just let them cry themselves to sleep.
Which is interesting because so you mentioned it dates back to Roman and Greek times. So Galen was one of the proponents of this back in the ancient times. According to what he wrote down, he would have probably actually recommended that you let some blood and cool them down. So the reason we don't really know why they decided to say, actually, just let them dance. In fact, let's get them to dance a bit more so they sweat it out.
You'd have thought that would heat up the blood even more.
Yeah, well, exactly. But apparently there was a local precedent in the previous outbreaks where they just let the people dance and it went away.
Yeah. It's funny when you look at this sort of thing and you have to be like, well, what medical evidence did they have for this other than the fact that this is the way we've always done it?
Absolutely none.
Yeah. I mean, this is when you watch Blackadder, there are jokes about being prescribed leeches, and this is the kind of stupid idea that's referring to.
The great Hoffman, owner of the largest leech farm in Europe. Yes, so it's just interesting how they decided to settle on it being a sort of a physical matter that they could treat rather than being a spiritual one, which is how Tropea was treated in a way. We don't actually know what happened to her.
No,
there's no record of like if she survived or what happened afterwards, which is again typical because she's a woman. No one cared about her. We like to imagine that she survived and she was all right. But anyway, the 21 decided on the basis of medical advice to do the one thing they shouldn't have done.
Yeah,
and that's absolutely encourage it. So they then began to construct a massive stage and also clear out sections of the city to herd in the dancers.
Yeah, so they've cleared out markets. There was a large field that was used for auctions for animals, and they cleared that out. So you think it would have cost them a fair amount of money in clearing this, and also quite a bit of lost revenue for the business that could no longer happen. So they must have been pretty keen on this idea to go to this much trouble.
Well, they even hired a band.
Yeah, they hire a band and they hire dancers with the sole intention to keep them dancing, even if any of them snap out of it and decide that's quite enough dancing for today. They were forced to keep going. I guess it's sort of like, you talk about like it's not so much a thing now, but like children being caught smoking by their parents, and their parents say, "Right, you're gonna smoke what? You're gonna smoke the whole packet now, and then we'll see how you feel."
Or yeah, like chickenpox parties.
All that, yeah.
But yes, so that they hired a band, they hired dancers, and of course it had the complete opposite effect. More people started taking part. More people fell under this trance. More started convulsing and dancing until they've collapsed on the floor. What
you'd arranged is a giant party. Of course, people were going to join in.
So inevitably there were people who just joined in for the fun of it. But
yeah,
by all accounts, most people that eventually joined in were under this trance. Because you've got to remember, these are people that are half-starved. They're poor. They're probably emaciated. Because you're in this trance-like state.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever experienced trance. Well, I don't know if you remember it, actually, to be fair. I don't know the psychological science behind it. But you're kind of compelled to do more things than you normally would. You don't really notice the pain. So people were just dancing until they dropped. And when they awoke again, they would just do it. They would just start up again.
Is there a vague possibility that somehow these people were on MDMA?
It did not exist back then, no.
It's a shame, really. They probably would have quite enjoyed it.
Yes. So, of course, inevitably, it got worse. A lot worse. More and more people were beginning to take part. More and more people were beginning to die. So by the end of July, so it only took them about 2 weeks to realise, they completely changed tact and began an opposite approach of a complete moral purge. So they expelled all the prostitutes and people of loose morals, fearing that the plague was a divine one after their natural medicine attempt had failed.
Yeah.
They also reversed the public dancing and imposed a fine of 30 shillings on any person caught dancing in public, forcing many to sort of lock away their sort of family members in their houses while they're still dancing away and probably causing havoc in the furniture.
You have to feel for the prostitutes, really, because they were essentially evicted from the city, and what would have been a group of quite vulnerable women alone in the countryside.
Exactly. Again, blame the women. It's all their fault.
But they don't seem to put any thought to that. They're just like, prostitutes? Well, we'll get rid of them.
But it was always going to be a temporary measure because prostitutes were needed for the social fabric of life in the city. But they needed to clear out this illness, and they firmly pinned it on sin and vice and God being pissed off.
So by mid-August 1518, as you say, they've changed tact. They've stopped the forced dancing, and they've decided to go for basically a moral purge. Prostitutes are out, casinos are out, all of that stuff. And they look at, I don't know if it's specifically because it was something that allegedly worked for Frau Trophea originally or not, but they decide that they are going to take these dancers to the shrine of St. Vitus. And the idea was that the plague was in fact a curse or divine punishment brought upon them by St. Vitus, and he in turn would be the one who would have the power to cure them if they basically showed their face and appeased him. So by late August, authorities are organising processions and pilgrimages to the shrine of St. Vitus, and it's quite a long journey. Some of them are loaded onto carts, some of them are expected to sort of walk their way there. It all sounds very impractical to me.
It's surprising the amount of effort and money they put into this, because they hired a load of wagons and crammed as many people as they could in while they're still dancing. So that must have been a fun journey for them. And as we mentioned, his shrine chapel is actually quite a small place in the mountains of Saverne. The city also decided to sort of pay homage to the saint by building him a new shrine, and commissioned an enormous wax effigy made in his image of him in the cauldron, which they then decided would be too difficult to move to the shrine, so they melted it down into a big candle to take to the shrine as well. And then they also commissioned cobblers to make red shoes, which is an interesting thing.
Yeah, the red shoes are a bit of a mystery, because by all accounts, red was a very expensive dye at the time, so it would have been quite an expense for the committee to produce these red shoes for basically a bunch of plague-stricken peasants.
They were led up this winding path to the chapel once they'd gotten off the carts, because they couldn't take the wagons all the way to the chapel because it was quite a small place and sort of a cave overlooking the valleys below. They were then given these red shoes. They were put on the red shoes, which I must imagine must have been quite difficult with people dancing all the time.
Must be like putting shoes on a screaming child or something.
Exactly.
Or a dog.
Dogs can actually be quite easy to put clothes on. If it's cats that are the problem.
And not if they've got dance fever.
So that the shoes were then dabbed with holy water. Tried to do as many as possible, so they split them into different groups, and there were a number of priests that they brought along to sort of give them a nice mass. I mean, who doesn't love a mass?
You might as well have one, mightn't you, on hand?
Exactly. And
so while
they were being given this mass, they were led around the altar in a circular motion, wearing these red shoes, which was a common superstition about purifying the soul. If you walked around in a circle, then you're all good. So, if you're ever feeling a bit dicky, just walk around in a circle. Right. They then sacrificed a penny to the altar to St. Vitus, which would then go into charity.
Yeah.
And obviously these were a lot of poor people, so they didn't have a penny. So that they were sort of given a penny to sacrifice.
Okay.
And then after that, they were led home. But yeah, as you said, the red shoes are an interesting point, because some people consider it might be a homage to, obviously, the charred, burnt red feet of St. Vitus, which is in the cauldron.
Yeah.
I personally think that maybe it was actually a way of the nobles saying to God and the saints, look, we're giving them some nice red shoes. As we're being charitable. so don't spite us with this dance.
Oh,
I think it was also a way of them buying off, in a way.
Right. You think they didn't want to get caught up being, potentially culpable if this was, punishment for the city's sins.
Yeah, I think they just wanted to show they were generous to their subjects, to the gods above.
They must have thought St. Vitus was really stupid then.
Yeah, probably. I mean, so this went on for a number of days, and the big question is, did it work? And the answer is, sort of yes.
Yeah, it sort of did. At least it worked better than anything else they'd tried before, which was a result.
Bear in mind that they tried basically one thing.
Yeah, and that thing was, let's make them dance till they die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they didn't really have much further to go downwards. So it was only up.
Yeah. So by early September 1518, as we say, the plan to basically visit the shrine of St. Vitus seemed to be having some positive effects, and the number of afflicted cases begins to decline. So the authorities, seeing this as a success, decide to enforce bans on music and public dancing in an attempt to prevent any kind of reoccurrence of the mania. And these measures actually went as far as prohibiting musical instruments and any public gatherings that might trigger more dancing.
There were a number of exceptions, such as weddings.
Yeah, but barn dances were out. None of that. No, I guess the no performances of river dance. Stomp were banned from the city.
Oh yeah.
Would you like me to continue with my weird 90s references?
No West Side Story for them.
Oh god. Maybe this is where line dancing comes from, because it doesn't really look like dancing, does it? It just looks like
mad convulsions.
It looks like a lot of people who are lost in the supermarket.
So, one of the reasons why the ritual might have worked is it played into the belief of the afflicted that they had atoned and appeased the saint. So, after going into this is the idea that they went into this trance sort of almost willingly in a way.
Yeah.
Because they were enduring hardship and they were trying to appease God and the saint. And this was their way of kind of dealing with all of that trauma themselves, but also a way of appeasing them. So psychologically, they were sort of cured. So after years of misery and neglect as well from the people that were supposed to look after them, the nobles, the burghers, and the clergy, they were suddenly being lavished with attention as well. Yeah. So suddenly they felt like, oh, our lives matter, we're important, because they've given us red shoes, they've taken us up this mountain, they've done what they can to help us.
So they've basically cheered them up a bit.
And on top of that, things were getting a bit easier. So, there were better crops, there was a better stability in the region, and a sort of general increase in living, really. So things were looking up. So after a few disastrous years, and they were, as we mentioned, they're pretty freaking disastrous. In fact, so disastrous, there were a number of peasant revolts, notably led by this fellow called Jos Fritz. Led 3 revolts, 1502, 1512, and 1519. Each time they failed because one of his co-conspirators decided to go and babble to a priest.
Yes, and each time he runs off into the woods. So this is essentially historically where the story kind of peters out. Obviously, it was a bit of a curiosity at the time, but once it was all done with, they're not going to write more about what happened to the peasants. So, as you say, we don't know what happened to Frau Trophea. Probably reasonable to believe that a lot of the victims probably did suffer afterwards, possibly through physical trauma from weeks of relentless activity. Records at the time of people dancing until their feet were bloody and bruised, and that's possibly not the sort of thing that you get over very quickly. And it's also possible that they suffer from long-term chronic pain and muscle fatigue. There was also the issue of the psychological trauma of the experience. PTSD obviously wasn't a concept back then, but I'm sure it probably would have been quite traumatic for them at the time.
I mean, what we do know is that after this, there aren't any other recorded notable outbreaks of there may be 1 or 2 isolated cases, but there were never a sort of mass outbreak of dancing, which I'm not really sure why, because things don't necessarily get any easier after the 1500s. But this was also the time of the great religious Reformation. You have Martin Luther nailing his feces in... Sorry, not feces. Nailing his thesis.
Yes.
I mean, if he nailed his feces to the door, that would have been a different statement. So maybe the sort of... That was more distracting to people, the fact that there was this sort of schism in the religion that they believed in all their lives.
Yeah, I mean, Europe was sort of on the cusp of a great social change at this point. This is the coming of the Reformation. So it might just be that the attitudes changed and whatever it was that sparked this was no longer a factor. You sort of, when you look at it and you go, well, they danced, and then in return, the authorities, they took them on a nice trip to the countryside. They got to visit a shrine. They were given some shoes, and they got taken home again. You'd have thought they'd have another go at it, you know. Next time they're a bit bored or they feel like a bit hard done by, they could just, you know, do some dancing again.
Well, this is it. I mean, the whole point, or at least one of the theories put forward by Waller, and indeed a number of psychologists, was that these were all dissociative trances. So it's a dramatic loss of self-control. There is a speculation that some people may have simulated the behaviour of being under an effort of a trance or under possession of a demon as a means of eliciting positive attention. But just from all the descriptions of how people describe them, you know, they weren't fully conscious. They weren't coherent or speaking properly. They were wild. They were frenzied. They danced because they were no longer clear in their minds, and they danced despite being starving and emaciated. It really was a mass sort of psychological thing. I mean, human beings are very much like water particles in a way. I remember seeing a video once of like a really shocking how people get crushed at a gig. It's because human bodies sort of simulate how water moves when they're sort of packed in tight environments. So they sort of flow. And you'll experience this when you're walking through a street. You enter a thick crowd and you're sort of in the sways of the crowd rather than your own person anymore.
There were studies. I remember reading studies. It was about football hooliganism, and it was this idea that you could take a reasonable individual with their own set of ethics and morals, and you could put them into a group, and essentially when you become part of a group, you all adopt this unique set of ethics and morals that apply to you collectively. So it doesn't really matter that everyone has their own ideas. You sort of become this blob with the group, and that's why you get things like you can
Millwall
have
fans.
Millwall fans, yeah. I can't remember who Millwall's rivals are. Are they Spurs?
I think everyone who's not Millwall.
Everyone who's not Millwall. Well, when the Millwall fans mean everyone who's not Millwall, you could have some very normal, you know, people in there. You could have people who do normal, everyday things who aren't generally up for a scrap, but you put them in a group like that, and the group decides it wants to fight, then they go along for the ride.
It's that power of suggestion. I mean, as we mentioned, there were other explanations like that. So ergot, which was a sort of mold that grew on certain crops, was thought to induce hallucinations and convulsions, a bit like an early MDMA, as you mentioned earlier. In fact, it was a particularly high rate of this in nuns who were eating lots of bread made from contaminated flour. Maybe they were just searching for a thrill. But it's very unlikely in this case because it wouldn't have caused such a prolonged period of dancing. But it's just interesting also that connection to having such a terrible lot in life. You know, like that depressed communities are unusually prone to this sort of what is termed choromania, or this sort of epidemic possession of people to dance. And so we talked about 1374 before. So during that time, you had the River Rhine flooding. You know, water was pouring over towns. You know, you had horse corpses flowing through the streets along with people. So you can see why people may have sort of just lost it and turned to something which is primal, like dancing, and also evokes a bit of joy, because if you dance, you're usually happy.
Tarantism was this thing. It was in Italy, southern Italy, in the 14th to 17th centuries. So it broadly sort of aligns with this period of time. And it was a form of dance mania. They believe it's unrelated to what happened in Strasbourg. It was its own sort of movement. And people who are afflicted with tarantism believe themselves to have been bitten by tarantulas. and that the only cure was to engage in frantic dancing, often accompanied by convulsions and sweating and speaking in tongues. And there's a lot of doubt on whether these people were actually bitten by spiders or whether it was another form of sort of mass trance. It's a very strange thing, but it sort of shows that this sort of thing wasn't unique to that part of Europe at the time. It was happening in other parts of the world. There's also records of groups of people in Africa having their own sort of form of mass trance as well. And again, that had, at the time, the belief was that there were spiritual undertones to that.
And I believe there's been some more modern, what we would term outbreaks of this as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously Glastonbury most years.
Yeah. Although I feel like, I guess they're entering the right frame of mind to be taken over by a possessed trance of dance.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound too bad to me. But maybe what Strasbourg needed was just a good chill-out tent.
As you said, with the Tarantism, I mean, there's an anthropologist called Erica Bourguignon who basically talks about this, what she calls environment of belief. A set of ideas about the world that each member of the community sort of signs up to, believes in, which allows them to enter this sort of trance-like state. So with 1508, you have this environment of belief that they accepted that they were miserable, they accepted the sort of terrible nature around them, but they also accepted the idea of this threat of divine curse, possession, and bewitchment. So they didn't intend to become tranced, but their metaphysical beliefs made it possible for them to do so. So the environment of their belief sets them up to fail in a way.
You see it sometimes, don't you, in sort of even in modern times, in those they usually are sort of big American churches, don't they? And they try and will the devil out of someone, and they're speaking in tongues and twitching on the floor.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, if you're not part of that culture, it looks a bit like a pantomime. But allegedly, the people, they actually, experience that. They say, "Oh, I was involuntarily speaking in tongues. I was possessed. It was something else controlling me." And it's amazing how powerful belief can be. Oh, is this the quiz?
It is the quiz. Will you be top of the pops, or will you be murdered on the dance floor?
Very good. Lovely little Sophie Ellis Bextor reference there.
It is, yes. I'm surprised we haven't squeezed more song references in throughout this, to be fair. We've not done that. But I guess it's just such one of those fascinating topics, isn't it, where it's just like, it's all a little bit mad, but it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, there's only so many disco references you can make when you're talking about something that happened in the 16th century.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Anyway, are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
So all of these questions are slightly, because we both read the same source materials, I've been very careful to make them slightly related to the topic, so not necessarily directly related.
Right.
Okay. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Question number 1. A number of short films have been made about this epidemic because it has obviously captured the creative mindset of many an artist and filmmaker.
Yes.
One of the most recent was actually a short film directed by none other than Jonathan Glazer, who filmed a number of dancers during COVID lockdown performing trance-like dances.
Yeah.
So, what was the name of this film? Was it A, The Dancing Plague?
Okay.
B, A Fever You Sweat Out? Or C, Strasbourg 1518?
The first one sounds very obvious. The third one sounds he's tried to be a bit more clever, and the second one sounds stupid. So I'm going to go with the third one.
And you are absolutely correct. It is Strasbourg 1518, which is the least imaginative out of all those titles, if I'm honest. But yes, it depicts, it's about 10 minutes long, and you can watch it on YouTube if you feel like watching a bunch of people dance around in their empty apartments.
I'd call it Dance Reformation.
Oh, that's quite good, actually. Yeah. You should give them a call.
Yeah, I got a pat.
But well done.
Yes,
One
thank
right.
you.
Yes. Question 2. As saints go, St. Vitus was pretty terrifying if he could curse you with dancing. but perhaps not as terrifying as the doom metal band named after him. However, they weren't originally called St. Vitus, because they were inspired to change their name from Tyrant after hearing another band's song which has the title St. Vitus. What was that band?
Oh, okay.
Was it A, Black Sabbath, B, Alice Cooper, or C, Iron Maiden?
Oh, I could definitely see Iron Maiden doing a song called St. Vitus. I could also see Black Sabbath doing it, actually.
I mean, to be fair, you could see all of them.
Could you explain to me what doom metal is?
It's an extreme subgenre of heavy metal music that typically uses slower tempos, low tuned guitars, and much thicker or heavier sounds, with lots of heavy screaming. And that's according to Wikipedia. But I'm sure a true doom metal aficionado would say otherwise.
It doesn't sound very danceable. I'm going to go Black Sabbath. I think Black Sabbath would sing about a Catholic saint from the 7th century or whatever.
You have lucked it out again, my friend. That is absolutely right. It is Black Sabbath.
Ozzy Osbourne's band, wasn't it?
It was Ozzy Osbourne's band, yes.
Yeah.
Question 3. As we mentioned, St. Vitus is just one of many saints.
Yeah.
But how many actual saints, or at least a close approximation, are there according to Catholic canon?
Ooh, okay.
Are there A, 11,000?
Yeah.
B, 32,000? Or C, 56,000?
Are they still appointing new saints?
Yeah.
You know,
Pope rolls them out, yeah.
Did Mother Teresa get to be a saint?
I think she is a saint, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot what the question was.
How many saints are there?
Oh, yeah, how many saints? There's a lot, isn't there? I think it's the middle one.
32,000.
32,000, yeah.
Are you going to luck out again? No, you're not.
No.
I'm afraid the answer was just over 11,000.
Oh, right.
At least according to the most recent data I can find.
We'll come back in a few years and maybe I'll be right.
I don't think a statement's ever been true when I say God knows only how many saints there are, because many have been lost to time.
The other thing is that it'd be very hard to assign characteristics or events or professions to all of your saints and not have some kind of overlap, you know. Once you've had, the saint of beekeepers, is that done? Because can you have another saint of beekeepers later on if somebody else pops up, or because that's a lot of things to think up. 11,000 things to be saints of. Yeah, I mean, do they modernize it? Do you have like the saint of iPods or something?
I'm not quite sure we're there yet.
No, okay.
Also, iPod's now extinct, so you don't really need one.
No.
Anyway, you're doing well. You got 2 out of 3 so far.
Good, yeah.
So, question 4.
Yeah.
This is actually going to be a quite tricky question.
Okay.
Obviously, all of this took place, as you mentioned, during the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Which, at the time, was governed by Ferdinand I.
Yes.
This was part of an unbroken empire that would last up and around 1806, beginning from 962.
Yeah.
There was a previous sort of beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, but it's kind of a bit disputed by history, because obviously the first emperor of the Roman Empire was considered, in this medieval period, was considered Charlemagne.
Yeah.
However, his empire sort of gets broken up a bit, and then it starts again in 1962. It starts again in 962.
Yeah.
So who is the emperor who is recognised as sort of by a lot of historians as one of the first true rulers of the Holy Roman Empire to use the title? So who is the emperor crowned in that year?
Okay.
Was it A, Otto I, B, Charles III, or C, Guy?
Ooh, Emperor Guy. I'm going to go with Otto. Otto sounds familiar, like I've read that Emperor Otto I before.
Not another Charles?
Well, I mean, Charles III feels a little bit...
There are quite a lot of Charleses. But not Guy?
I like the sound of Guy, but I don't recognise that name as being an emperor of the Holy Roman. I'm not an expert of the Holy Roman Empire, but I recognise Otto as being.
Just
one
to
of
clarify, these are all emperors.
They were all actual emperors
Yeah.
at some point in time.
Yeah,
It's not.
But
a
which
case of-
one is the one elected in 962?
Oh, in that case, it's anyone's guess, isn't it? Let's stick with Otto.
And you are absolutely correct. You've lucked it again.
No.
He is considered one of the, if not the first, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. He is the medieval forerunner of the modern German state. Born in northern Germany, he went on to rule all of Germany as king and defeated the Magyars, whose invasions had threatened Europe for decades.
Nice. Well done, Otto.
Yeah, not really much to say about Charles III. Guy, however, was the Margrave of Camerino from 880 and the Duke of Spoleto and Camerino. I'm taking all this from Wikipedia, by the way. He was crowned King of Italy in 889 and Emperor in 891. He then died only 3 years later while fighting for control of the Italian peninsula.
Oh, a short run then.
Yes.
What a guy.
He was, yeah. Question 5.
Yes.
The city of Strasbourg is now located in France, but has changed hands many times, bouncing primarily between France and Germany.
Yeah.
This has led to a distinct dialect, mostly still spoken by the older people. It's slightly dying out. But what is this dialect called? Is it A, Alsatian,
Ooh, okay, yeah.
B, Affenpinscher,
I can see where this is going.
or C,
Is it Golden Retriever?
or C, Weimariner?
I don't know why, Mariner.
They are also all breeds of dog.
But yes. I think I know this. I think it's something to do with Alsace, and that means it's Alsatian. No, I'm going to go Alsatian. Yeah.
Congratulations, that is the right answer.
Nice.
It is the unique dialect spoken around Strasbourg, and it's actually on the street signs today still, which causes quite a bit of confusion for some people. A bit like when you go to Wales and you just can't read the signs.
Yeah, or that bit of Spain where they have Catalonia, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yes. It's also a dog breed, as we said, and Affenpinscher is also a dog breed, originally bred in the 1600s to chase and kill rats.
Yeah?
They have become delightful, goofy companion dogs, apparently. And the Weimar, I'm not saying this word right. The Weimariner,
Yeah.
obviously comes from a place near Weimar in Germany. Is a German breed of hunting dog. So yes, well done. 4 out of 5.
Nice. Thank you.
You've certainly held your own out there on the floor. But yes, that's all we have time for.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you for those who have been listening to us over the years. Thank you for doing so. We do appreciate it, and please do continue to listen and send us your feedback. We love to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Share us with your friends if you think that they'd enjoy it. We've had a lot of good feedback in recent months, actually, but a lot of good recommendations for podcast topics as well. Yeah,
we have. I'd like to get us to get to the point where we're getting enough feedback that we can have a mailbag section like on Blue Peter.
I could just start pretending to write in, if that helps.
I mean, it would just be insane, wouldn't it? The questions, it would be like, you know, why is Nick so dreamy? And quite frankly, I don't have an answer for that.
I don't think I have an answer for that either. I've never been told I'm dreamy. I've been told I put people to sleep, which is slightly different, but I'll take it. Yeah. Well, there's one. If this is your special going to sleep bedtime podcast, let us know. I think it does. I think that was well done. Let's leave it on a high, shall we? And say we'll see you next time. And here is the clue for what the next episode's going to be about.
There seem to have been a very large number of casualties.
Well, I suppose 5 is quite large in these circumstances. It's unfortunate.
Local people are saying that you used excessive force when you went in there.
Well, what is force?
Somebody once said the trouble with the English is that they never remember, and the trouble with the Irish is that they never forget.